Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Quads Get Gold. I'm Saul Montez Bradley. I'm a Vice President of Communications for the Gold Institute for International Strategy, and I'm here today to have a conversation with Congressman Trent. He's a conservative. I believe his conservative credentials have been well established for quite some time. A Reagan Republican, and served 15 years in the United States Congress. He served on the House Judiciary Committee, where he was chairman of the Subcommittee on the Constitution and Civil Justice. Come to think of it, never was a man of his experience and knowledge more needed in this country. He was also a member of the House Armed Services Committee, serving on the Emerging Threats and Capabilities Subcommittee, and as vice chair of the Strategic Forces Subcommittee. Trent chaired the Orphans and Vulnerable Children Caucus, as well as the Congressional Caucus on Adoption and the International Religious Freedom Caucus and the Missile Defense Caucus. He served as a founding co-chairman of the Congressional Israel Allies Caucus and is a staunch advocate of Israel and a pro-lifer with credentials nobody can match. He is also a soft-spoken, wonderful person that if you were to bid him someplace, you would be hard-pressed to recognizing him a congressman, because he behaves like the best of your neighbors. And like Calvin Coolidge, whether he carries a big stick or not, he speaks softly and is willing to engage in conversation with all kinds of Americans, regardless of their ideology. This is a trait that we desperately need in D.C. today, and I hope that in the next hour you get a glimpse of what I'm talking about. Without further ado, let me bring on camera Congressman Trent. Oh, I forgot to say, just in case you've never seen one of these before, we're doing this series in order to make folks aware of the Gold Institute for International Strategy, and God forbid, maybe even get some donations. Right underneath, there is a link for donations to the Institute that are tax deductible to the extent permitted by law. And you can also click on the support button, depending on the platform you're watching this on, and contribute to the Institute so that we may do more and more of this series as time goes by. And now, let me bring in Congressman Trent.
Saul, it's so good to be with you. I just appreciate the invitation here. I support you so deeply. I know your heart for freedom. I know your heart for people. I know that you want to serve God and your fellow human beings. And I know that you're a true patriot. And I want you to know it is my sweet privilege to be on this program with you. And I appreciate your support for the Gold Institute. You know, I happen to be one of their distinguished fellows, which maybe I should be an extinguished fellow. But the truth is, I really believe in what they do as well. And they're a great group, and they're having an impact all over the world in a positive way. So I just want you to know it's a privilege to be on this program with you.
Thank you so much. I don't want to make this a contest, but I assure you it is my honor and privilege to have you here with us tonight. Now, we have to get the ball rolling somehow.
Yes, sir.
And there is a question that I'd like to start with, because I believe that most people do not quite understand what we have witnessed in the past few days in the election of the Speaker. For those of us who know history, uh, it wasn't such a big deal.
Right.
But some are trying to make it, like all of a sudden nobody knows what they're doing. And I would like to have your perspective, because I'm sure it's going to clarify in the minds of people, and put it down to size, if you will.
Well, I tell you, it is a complex thing as to be able to express the reasons why this took place. And I'd like to do that, but let me, if I could, just give a quick overview. I agree with you, Saul. This was really not an attack on democracy as much as it was an expression of democracy. You know, this is something that this happens. There are people that want to move the needle in a particular ideological direction. The Freedom Caucus there, I'm being very, very open with you. I support them. I love them. I used to be one of them. And maybe I thought that there were a couple of things that they asked for in the beginning that were not reasonable and not able for the speaker-elect or the speaker-designate to be able to grant. And so sometimes, you never want to ask a person something they cannot give. But the truth is, I am convinced that in their heart, they were trying to do what they thought was good for America. And that's the reason for some of their adamance and their adamant nature. There's always a few people in any group that sometimes come across a little bit strident or arrogant, and that's never a good thing. But the truth is, both the Speaker and the Freedom Caucus, I'm convinced that both of them, even though they may have some different ideas, they both want to do what's good for this country. I know Kevin very well, and he is a good man. Is he as conservative as me? No, but so very few people are. So I don't blame him for that. Maybe he's the one that's got the brains and not me. But the truth is, he wants to do good for the country. And I think he's going to be a better speaker having gone through this process. And I think that the Freedom Caucus is going to have a strong presence to kind of assert their commitment to trying to see this country go into a more sane and more conservative direction. Now, I have a strong conviction as to why that there is this ongoing divide in the U.S. House of Representatives, but I want to take a breath here and let you have a chance at me. But I do want to try to explain that. It's a little bit esoteric, a little bit hard to get to help everybody understand, but it's something that this country is going to have to deal with in the future.
Yes, indeed. And when I made a reference to your style and how much it's needed, it's because people tend to forget that the Congress is a deliberative body, and we're inevitably going to have people on opposite ends of the spectrum and everywhere in between. And they're expected to duke it out, if you will, more or less civilly, until they find a consensus. And my impression is that Congress was designed from the get-go to make it impossible to do anything without some degree of consensus.
Right. Well, you couldn't be more right. I mean, the numbers are what they are. Somebody once said that mathematics do not minus hate or plus love, but they give us hope that every problem has a specific answer. And in the Congress, it really is about the mathematics. It's about the number of people that support something. So sooner or later, we come to, some kind of decision. And it's ironic when you talk about being a deliberative body. This gives me a perfect opportunity to kind of explain to you why I think that there is such a division sometimes in the House of Representatives. And it's one that is forced upon them, not one that they choose. And Saul, this is a tough subject, okay, that I wanted to bring up. But in the U.S. Senate, we talk about it being a deliberative body, but it's become almost a non-deliberative body because we've had a filibuster process for a long time, and that was meant to give particular issues full and complete debate, and I support that. There's some good things about that. If you make it easy to legislate, sometimes we are not careful and not cautious in what we do. But people don't realize that there are two filibusters in the U.S. Senate. and the media never really covers it. One of those filibusters says that you cannot actually fully pass legislation in most cases without a 60 vote margin.
Yeah.
And
That would be the cloture vote or the vote
well,
to end discussion.
yeah, and that gives
Right.
them the opportunity to vote and pass it off the floor.
Yes.
But there's also one that gives them the same dynamic to bring something to the floor for debate.
Right.
And a lot of people aren't really familiar with that. And in the 1970s, the Democrats changed it from a full debate mechanism to something that prevents all debate. The first filibuster that you mentioned extends debate, but the one as far as bringing it to the floor or not
Allows for debate.
Yes, but it allows the minority, in this case the Democrats, to prevent, well, at the time, to prevent all debate. Now the Republicans don't take advantage of it so much because we have an ideal that we want to support, but unfortunately our friends on the left have no hesitation to prevent anything from coming to the floor that they want to come to the floor. That's particularly significant in the area of appropriations, and I'll give you an example. If we don't make appropriations, government comes to a halt because a government is what it spends. And many times the House will pass an appropriations bill that fairly accurately represents the ideals of the American people, because the House is very closely aligned with the American people, where, you know, in New York, you got 2 senators, Rhode Island, you got 2 senators. Well, there's a little bit of an imbalance there. But in the U.S. House, the population is represented on a per capita basis. Are we together on that? We understand where we are?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, so the U.S. House, when they pass an appropriations bill or a budget bill, they're able to essentially, most of the time, reflect the views of the American people. But when it goes over to the Senate, if the Democrats are in control, they simply don't let something come to the floor that they don't fully agree with. And that puts the whole country in a situation where if we don't pass the budget, then the country shuts down. And of course, our friends on the left blame the Republicans for shutting it down. But if the Democrats are in the minority, they do the same thing. They simply will not allow the bills to come to the floor with the 60 votes. And so they say, well, no, we're not going to let that bill come to the floor. You're shutting the government down. We're not shutting the government down. The House has passed the bill. But they won't let it come to the floor, and they say, no, you're shutting the government down. That can't come to the floor. They can't get the 60 votes, requisite votes. So what happens then? They say, we want the appropriations bill to look like this, or otherwise we won't let it come to the floor, and you will be blamed for shutting the government down.
Right.
So by the time the Senate revises the spending process, revises all the appropriations bill, it's no longer indicative of even a Republican majority if the Republicans are in control. So it goes back to the House then, and now it's a Democrat bill. And the Republicans that were in control, that passed it, a lot of the conservatives said, well, that's crazy. We can't do that. We're already...
We can't vote for this.
No, we can't vote for that. And so now they're stuck. If they don't vote for it, the government shuts down and the Republicans get the blame for it. If it's about defense, it's very serious. We can't let our defense or our national security components be ignored. So it creates this dynamic where it falls on the House to go along with the Senate in every case, because if they don't, the government shuts down. And it doesn't matter whether the Democrats are in control or not, they still have control.
They still have the control.
And here's why, and then I'm almost done. I'll take a breath here because this is a hard one to explain. But here's why that's true. You say, well, why isn't it reciprocal? Why does it matter? Why is it that no matter whether the Democrats are in control or not, that they win the battle? Here's why. Republicans are trying to reduce spending and trying to make sure that government is more spending its money in ways that do not handicap and crush future generations with debt. So when Democrats are in the minority, Republicans try to reduce the budget, right? Democrats simply say, well, we can't let that come to the floor. And the only way that can happen to get to the floor is they have to buy the Democrat votes by putting ridiculous spending provisions in the bill. So it bloats the budget.
Everybody's pet project needs to be addressed.
Exactly. But now when the Republicans are in the minority, we don't have that option because it doesn't work for us to bloat the budget to get a sane budget. You see, so no matter what happens, we're in trouble. And each time,
and certainly Republicans are not interested in blocking the budget so that they can add expenses.
Exactly. Now you saw your very quick study, and I will say to you that applies in a lot of other dynamics in the Congress. But the bottom line is, we're not, as Republicans generally, we're not willing to take the bill hostage or the country hostage to get our way. Whereas, unfortunately, my friends on the Democrat side are, and so they have the decided advantage. And the dynamic is such that it falls back to the House then, and it creates an absolute war in the House among the Republicans now to try to say, well, we can't do this, and they're stuck. If they pass the bill that the Democrats want, it hurts the country. If they don't, the government shuts down.
It hurts the country.
And it hurts the country. And then the Republicans don't get reelected. And now the Democrats are more powerful than ever. Okay.
Yes.
I'll stop there.
When I was in South America fighting fascism, there was a phrase that I actually heard one of the other side. I questioned him about the death of an Italian businessman who was attributed to a guerrilla movement, but it was in fact carried out by the army. And I said, why did you guys do that? He was a friend of yours.
Yeah.
And they answered, it doesn't matter who dies. It matters who gets the blame.
Right. Wow.
To hear it like that is bone-chilling.
Yes, it is.
And in a way, in the budget discussions in the U.S., it doesn't matter how hard you hurt the country, it matters who gets the blame. I remember during the Obama years, in one of these budget disputes, the administration forced the closing of public parks that never close.
Right.
That have no guards at the entrance. I mean, the World War II Memorial.
Right.
Or the Jefferson Monument. Some with budgets that are independent of the budgetary discussions that were going on. They stopped the mailing of Social Security checks, which were not depending on the budget discussions. They are funded anyhow. And it was obvious that they had no qualms making the pain greater and causing greater harm to the country at large to make the point that the Republicans are bad.
Exactly. Well, and our system in this case, it creates a balance that doesn't work for Republicans and does work for Democrats. And I would just say to you that at some point, the filibuster, they will deal with it in a different way. When the Democrats get in power, they've already demonstrated now. I know some people thought I was losing my mind when I said when the Democrats finally get in power, they will change it, and then they will do terrible damage to the country.
Yes. And they tried. They were one vote short.
They absolutely tried. They were one vote short. Saul, I wish every person in Fox News would say something like you just said. They were one vote short from being able to obliterate this country. And as soon as they get in a position to do so, they will proceed. And unfortunately, when we get in power, we say, oh, no, we can't change the filibuster in any way. And so therefore, it's just a matter of time if we don't do something different. Now, it should be there is a way, if we're in control, to change it in a way that will still work for the country, that will still solve the original problem, so that we can debate these issues and help the American people be completely aware without making the Senate a mechanism to where the left is in complete control.
Perish the thought.
Perish the thought.
Alexis de Tocqueville, I think he actually says this, not with the exact quote, I'm paraphrasing, not quoting, in Democracy in America, that the American system was surprisingly good and it was working great, and it would continue to work until Congress figured out that they can buy the people with the people's money.
Right. Until the people recognize that they can vote themselves largesse, that he put it in that
Yes.
terminology. And that's exactly right. And that's what's happened. And unfortunately, it reduces productivity, and an entire degree in economics doesn't overcome one fundamental fact, that all economy is about productivity. And if you
Yes.
reduce productivity, you reduce the economy. And if you expand it, you nearly always expand it for everyone.
We all boats float with the incoming tide, but
Right.
I remember in the Soviet Union in the late '80s, a common joke. If you went down there, you would see everybody kind of like loitering in their places of work. Nobody was working, and the joke was, we pretend to work,
So they
and the
pretend
government pretends to pay us.
yeah, they pretend to pay us, so we pretend to work.
Yes, and productivity went through the floor.
Right, right.
I had a similar experience many moons ago with a factory in Argentina, which I strongly recommend anybody listening to this don't even think about it. And there were all kinds of laws that forced me as employer to pay all kinds of monies to anything related to anything but productivity. So I had two employees that worked at the same machine that were capable of producing the same amount of plates each. One was a 46-year-old with 7 children, the other one a 22-year-old with no children. The 46-year-old, more seasoned in the vagaries of the system and knowing that he couldn't be fired for any reason, would produce a couple of hundred plates an hour. The 23-year-old would produce 800 plates an hour. Same machine. Of course, the machine was capable of producing 1,600, but hey, that was never known to happen. At the end of the pay period, the 46-year-old that produced 200 plates would get a check that was 4 times larger than the 24-year-old that produced 600. How long do you think it took for the 26-year-old to start taking smoke breaks and produce 100?
Exactly right.
If there is no incentive, there is no production.
Could not agree with you more. Saul, of all the things that I believe next to Scripture, I would say it would be that quote, that which gets rewarded gets done.
Yes.
It is a fundamental fact, and unfortunately, it applies to almost every human dynamic, and it certainly applies economically. And I could not agree with you more. Free enterprise may not be perfect, but it has dragged more poor people out of the gutter and the clutches of poverty than any other mechanism in the history of man.
Yes.
And somebody said that it's true that free enterprise is the unequal distribution of wealth at times. But socialism is almost always the equal distribution of poverty and
misery.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes.
Sir.
They used to say out there that the difference between the Argentine Catholic Church and the Communist Party is that the Catholic Church preaches poverty, and the Communist Party makes it real.
I've been interviewed by a lot of people, and I tell you, Saul, I've never, that I remember in the recent years, ever been interviewed by someone that has a more acumen and fundamental understanding of the reality. I mean, there are a lot of people that understand a lot of the idiosyncrasies of politics, but sometimes we need people that really understand the realities and what works and what does not.
Yes, we do in every facet of life,
Yes.
and I would say that it is the duty of every citizen to study,
Yes.
to read everything, whether it is your favorite ideological paper or your most despised opposition paper.
Yes.
All of it. Trying to learn and understand, because this country, as designed, cannot function without an informed electorate.
That's right.
If we don't know, if we press for numbers instead of quality, it's not going to last. It's going to slide slowly into some kind of tyranny of the mob. And I'd like it because everybody calls everything socialism.
Yeah.
Yeah? So all of a sudden, communism, fascism, Trotskyism, they're all socialism. They're all interchangeable, and they're not.
Right.
But the low level of information leaves people to confuse one with the other, and perhaps they don't realize to what extent the corporatist state is taking hold of this country
Right.
and taking power away from Congress, for instance,
Right.
with all of these
ESG.
self-regulating entities.
Yes.
And what can we do at this late stage of the soiree?
Well, Saul, I know that it probably sounds, perhaps it sounds a little trite, but I'm convinced that if this country doesn't pay more attention to who we elect in positions of authority and power, that we will be look back someday and wish desperately that we had. I served with Mr. Biden for 6 years in the Congress while he was in the Senate and I was in the House. And
Yes.
it's very hard for me because I usually try very hard not to attack people personally, even if I disagree with them vehemently on the issues. But I have never seen Mr. Biden ever take a stand based on a heart commitment that he believed was right and good. It was always fundamentally based on the political advantage of the moment. And that is a recipe for disaster in a country's prime leader. And I
Yes.
cannot express to you, it's not that I think that guys like Joe Biden or Barack Obama are the real problem. They are simply ideologues that just don't seem to care about the country more than they care about individual political advancement. The great danger is a nation's electorate that would vote for such people to be our leaders. There is the great danger, and the American people will either wake up in some significant areas, or unfortunately, they and often their children will suffer great regrets as a result.
Yes, I am moderately hopeful, for in history in the U.S., it has come and gone like the tides.
Yes, yes.
And hopefully we will have a reversal of the tides as well. But of course, we all have to work towards it. When you spoke of the president just now, I was reminded of Groucho Marx.
Yeah.
This is my principle, and I stand on it. But if you don't like it, I have 2 or 3 more we can negotiate with.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more.
And that leads me to another area of expertise for you, if you're willing, because I know that you worked in some very sensitive issues while in Congress, and I'm sure you still cannot speak about them. So if you can, just tell me and we'll change subject immediately. But to have such a leader at this particular time in the world makes it extremely dangerous. I don't think that anybody with moderate information can understand the obsession of the Democratic Party with the deal with Iran.
Right.
I know I can't. I always try to understand both sides of the issue and the middle, but I just can't. What is it that this that makes these people so gung-ho into so destructive a policy for this nation?
Well, Saul, I would like to, I kind of, Saul used to be Paul, Paul used to be Saul, you know that. But
Um,
Saul, but Saul,
Readily interchangeable.
readily interchangeable. But I want to tell you, first of all, because I want to answer that question, I think it's a supremely important question. Um, the greatest heartbreak for me in Congress was to see how um, that our friends on the left just simply did not hold themselves constrained by the truth. That truth was disinvited from the debate, that it was merely how loud one could scream and uh, how they could leverage the process. It was not about truth anymore. Now, the one that's sad beyond comprehension, but the one good piece about that is that truth is a very powerful ally, and truth always has the last word. It's not my truth. It's not your truth. None of us have a full understanding of truth or any kind of control over it. The truth is just what it is. In fact, it means veritas in Latin, and that means what is. So the truth is what it is. And it's independent of our opinions. But unfortunately, we have now somehow equated or conflated opinions with truth. It's no longer a pursuit of the truth in politics. And that's a very dangerous thing. But be that as it may, you spoke about the pendulum, how things swing back and forth. And there's a reason that happens. And that is the truth emerges, and we have to change directions if we're going in a direction that is incompatible with the truth. The truth always wins. My background is engineering, and let me suggest to you that engineers don't usually stand around a critical problem and try to figure out who's right. They try to figure out what's right, because if they get it wrong, they get blown out in the streets. And we have got to get back to a commitment to the truth here. And the truth is, when you're talking about Iran, the truth is this country has an ideology that is absolutely antithetical to the United States. And the radical Islamist government in Iran has committed themselves to gain nuclear weapons by which to try to threaten the entire whole of humanity. And the Iran nuclear deal was something that some of us saw coming a long way before it came, and we tried to get the country to be aware of how dangerous it was. But unfortunately, we were unable to prevent it, and there were mechanisms in the Congress, like we discussed earlier in the call, that made it possible for Democrats to have the advantage to get this Iran deal put in place. Now, it's kind of ironic, because as it happens, and I don't say this out of ego, I just say it because it's the truth. I was the first member of Congress to call for Iran to be referred to the Security Council back when they only had 160 centrifuges by which to enrich uranium. And at the time, a lot of even some of the people that essentially might agree with me most of the time said that I was premature, that that they needed 3,000 centrifuges to ever be able to prepare to create the kind of fissile material capable to create atomic weapons or nuclear weapons. But I will tell you now today, because they've gone to the IR6, they have the equivalent, not of 160 centrifuges, but the equivalent of the same kind of centrifuges at that time, the IR1s. Now that they're doing the IR6s, their equivalency is 20,000 IR1s. And they have absolutely the capability of making enough nuclear fissile material for several atomic bombs every year. And if Iran gains the nuclear weapons capability, a true consideration of history, Saul, will point to Barack Obama being the father of the Iranian atomic bomb. Yes. Because of this deal that they forced through. It was an insane thing, and I pray.
And he will be responsible in history for one of the deadliest wars ever fought. Yeah. Because let's face it, this is another thing that the left likes to, let's say, play footsie with the truth. Nobody wants war.
No.
Nobody ever did. Unless, of course, people who are certifiably mentally ill. Nobody wants war. Nobody in the right wants war. Nobody in the left wants war. But wanting or not wanting war doesn't enter into it. It is the correlation of forces that will lead towards or away from war at any given time.
Right.
The Iran deal and its second part, which I think is far worse than the first one you mentioned.
Yeah.
Now that we have Mr. Ulyanov negotiating on behalf of the U.S. with the Iranians, I don't know what can come out of it.
Right.
But if Iran were to explode a nuclear device, knowing how they already are very active in a couple of dozen countries and virtually control 5, they will use or threaten to use their force, and they will provoke a war.
Right.
And it will be all but inevitable. We can sit at home and say, no, we're not going to do it, but we're going to get to the point that we will have no choice.
You are exactly right. I am absolutely convinced that an Iranian nation with nuclear weapons will almost inevitably create some type of major war that will spread far beyond the Middle East. And it is an incredible danger. And I've said it when I was in Congress, Saul, I said this. I said, people were saying, well, we might have to go to war to stop them from having nuclear weapons. And I said, whatever we expend, whatever the cost is in military terms or economic terms of preventing Iran from gaining nuclear weapons, it will pale in insignificance compared to the cost of dealing with a nuclear armed Iran. And I don't know how to make it any more clear or simple than that.
Do you know that you sound just like Jefferson?
Well, that's very kind of you. That I don't know what to say.
Well,
if Mr. Jefferson were here, we might be called out to do a duel.
I'll be more than kind. When he was Secretary of State, when he was Washington Secretary of State, and a discussion was had in the U.S. government as to whether to pay tribute to the Bay of Tripoli,
right,
to allow for the free navigation of American flagships in the Mediterranean. Jefferson opposed it. If we pay, they're gonna spend the money and come back for more, and we're gonna be paying forever.
Exactly.
And we're going to burden our trade with obnoxious costs. And then he said, any price, because of course the other side was, we can't afford a war with them. And Jefferson said, any price is preferable to the cost of the wages of terror.
Exactly.
Which is essentially what you just said.
Well, they're certainly based on the same premise. And Jefferson was right. And he, of course, he wasn't listened to right at first, but eventually he was able to put together an American force that essentially became our modern Marines. And we still make the song, from the halls, from the shores of Tripoli. But you're exactly right. And thank God for men like Jefferson that were able to see that, because it's not, most of these principles, Saul, are not those things relegated only to the intellectuals. Most of these things are pretty much common sense. But our greatest failure as a human family is our unwillingness to see and hold to the truth, even if it's not what we would like for it to be. The truth is, ironically, I always tell people, when they ask Jesus why he came to the earth when he was before Pilate, they said, well, why are you here? What's your purpose here? What's your plan? And that's the kind of the paraphrase version. He said, I came to bear witness to the truth. Now, he later said he was the truth. But the point is that truth is a very, very powerful thing. And without it,
It
we have
is.
no chance as a human family.
That's why I named my organization Quad Verum.
Quad Verum, yeah.
Not because we have the truth, but because we are searching for it.
Exactly. Exactly. None of us
Now,
should have the hubris or arrogance to say that we know that we're the only ones to know the truth. But that should be our common pursuit as a human family, that we want to pursue the truth so that all people, all God's children, can lay hold on the miracle of life and be free and pursue their dreams. In a sense, that capsulizes the whole ideal of America.
now, before we leave the topic of Iran, as we know, Iran is filling the void we left in Iraq in 2011,
Yes.
and trying to increase it almost daily. There is a formidable struggle going on there.
Right.
And the Iraqi region of Kurdistan stands as the last bastion of Iraqi freedom, ironically.
Right. Right.
What effect do you think would have in Iran if we were to arm the Peshmerga directly to assist them while they are under attack almost daily?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, Saul. I don't know if the Gold Institute informed you or not, but I'm the Gold Institute's a group that I'm part of, that I have the highest respect for. I believe that they are not only deeply committed individuals, but these are people of great intellect and acumen, and they understand the issues. And I have nothing to gain by saying that. I'm not paid by them. I'm not in any way. It has no financial impact on me at all. But let me say to you that I deeply, deeply hope that any of the listeners or anyone out there that will take a good look at the Gold Institute and realize that these people are on the front line of world freedom. And I pray that we can and continue to support them. With that said, they are aware of my involvement in when I was on the Armed Services Committee, to offering amendments, eventually successful, but not at first, to directly arm the Kurds. Of course, the Peshmerga was a critical component of that. But the KRG is a symbol of freedom in the Middle East. They are some of the most noble people that I know of anywhere, and I am deeply, deeply committed to continuing to support them. I've even gone on record as supporting independence for Kurdistan. So I'm very convinced that they are a critically important part of it. Whether or not they are an independent nation or not, they are certainly an example to the world. And I'm absolutely convinced that we should arm them directly, that we should do everything that we can to maintain their security as much as we can do to help them. And if we try to do that through the Iraqi central government rather than the Kurdish regional government, this doesn't work. We tried that. In fact,
It's not going to get to them.
It doesn't get to them. My first amendment was to make it directly to them. That amendment stayed on in the House. It was successful. But when it went over to the Senate, the Obama administration worked behind the scenes to take it out. Now, eventually, there was enough of an obvious problem that we were able to get that amendment for a time to give direct military support to the Kurds. But the truth is, since then it's just flagged because of the new administration. And I really want you to know that I'm deeply concerned about that, because the fact is that the Kurds were the one people that stood by the Yazidis and the Christians as they were being slaughtered by the ISIS troops. The Kurds showed courage when no one else did, and they will always have my support. I will always have their back in every way that I can.
Yes, and not only when it was time to save the Yazidis from extermination, but they took them in as refugees in numbers.
Absolutely.
That would make people wince. I mean, proportionately speaking, imagine that the U.S. were to take in 180 million refugees. That is the proportion to their population of
really.
Yazidi
I didn't realize it was that
and
much. I
cared
knew it
for.
was. I knew it was a lot. but they showed enormous
Yeah.
nobility.
Of course, the number is comparative to the population. What they got
Right,
was
right,
about
right,
3 billion refugees.
right, right.
But in the U.S., to approach the level of solidarity that the Kurds demonstrated to the Christian refugees in a world where that is not always the case,
Right.
it makes you pause. These are good people to the bone.
They are. They are very noble, and it is an ignoble thing to do to let them stand alone and have to fight the battles that they do by
Yes.
themselves.
And now they're trying to defend Jewish, Kurdish Jewish populations in
They are.
Iran that are
They
under
are.
attack
Yeah.
daily by the Iranian regime.
Right.
And nobody's talking about it. Have you noticed that?
No, I know. No, you're so right, Saul. And every opportunity I get, I try to speak on their behalf because I realize that they are one of the main reasons, or one of the main backstops against Iranian hegemony in the Middle East that's growing every day, as you just mentioned. And it's an intolerable danger for Iran to continue to gain an influence and hegemony the way they are. And the Kurds are one of the main groups that are really standing up to them. And I just salute them in every way I know how.
Yes. I would have to say, too, a lot of people talk about the Kurds and Turkey. And in fact, lo and behold, they are exporting their gas and oil through Turkey and working with the Turkish government in many ways to afford an income because the central government in Baghdad doesn't give them the time of day.
Right.
And what we see is that despite a history that is rife with conflict, the Kurds found a way to work with the Turks in
Right.
order to benefit both Kurdistan and Turkey. And this is the kind of thing that I'd like to see in the world.
I couldn't agree more. I think the Kurds, this is their own product, their own oil, and this is an area I'm very involved in, and I want to be open about that. And in full disclosure, I started working on a drilling rig when I was a boy, and I had 3 drilling rigs with my younger brother when I was 19, and we've drilled all over the world. We've not drilled in Kurdistan or Iraq, but we've drilled in different places, mostly Australia. So I'm very familiar with the process of not only exploration process, less so with the downstream process. But the truth is, I admire the Kurds and want to see them be able to have as much control over their own resources as possible and their own destiny as possible, because they are standing up for the whole world.
Excellent. Couldn't agree more, to tell you the truth. No. Iran, of course, is trying to project its power,
Sure.
such as it is.
Yeah.
And I'm often tempted to make humorous remarks about that. As we know, seeing that Russia is such a big producer of top-notch military material, they are now importing drones from Iran.
From Iran. Right.
And one thing that I would say is that it took the Ukrainians, and probably with some assistance from NATO, let's face it, but it took the Ukrainians 2 months to figure out how to take them down. And the last waves of drone attacks have been dozens of drones, of which maybe one would survive and make it to destination. Don't you think that Iran is biting larger than it can chew, and that by supplying drones to Russia, it's actually allowing everybody else to know what they have and how to take it down?
Well, I believe that is certainly true, and that I'm so proud of the Ukrainians for their courage and their ability to really stand up to Russia. I realize that there are a lot of different moving parts to this, Saul, and that we have to make sure that our priorities are all right. But we should make sure we understand that to lose the war in Ukraine is bad for the whole world. It strengthens
Yes.
Russia in a huge way, and it's bad for the whole world. And it's ironic that we've forgotten, it seemed like, that when Bill Clinton approached Ukraine the first time, they were you could arguably be the third nuclear power on Earth. They had all kinds of nuclear weapons.
They were the second already.
Well, I mean, it depends on how, when they were part of the Soviet Union or part of the,
Yeah.
it depends on how you measure it, because you got United States and Russia, and it kind of depends on how you count Ukraine as being part of, at that time, the USSR. But the point is, and when I say that, I mean as far as the weapons that they gained from being part of the USSR. That's a better way to put it. But the reality is, we came in and we said, listen, we want to build down nuclear weapons. We want to make sure that we get rid of these awful weapons. And if we could snap our fingers and erase all the nuclear weapons in the world, fine. But the tragedy is, we don't want the free people of the world to be without the ability to defend themselves when thugs like Putin is able to threaten the whole planet with these nuclear weapons. So we went in and we made this deal with the Ukrainians.
You're referring to the Budapest Memorandum of 1994.
Exactly. And we said, if you'll do away with your nuclear weapons, that Russia and America and the UK will stand up and defend your territorial sovereignty. And they did that. And then Russia later invaded, and we did nothing under Obama.
Well, that was under Obama in 2014.
That's right. And so that was an unbelievable statement to the world. And I would just say this: if you learn anything in a nuclear strategy, never invade a country that has nuclear weapons. That's a basic premise. Don't invade a country that has nuclear weapons. And unfortunately, the Ukrainians have learned that, and I hope the whole world is watching. When we weaken ourselves, when we weaken the cause of freedom, we do not further any good end. We end up hurting everyone. Yes. The arsenal of freedom must be the strongest on earth if people are to remain in the sunlight of freedom.
Yes, I do answer people when they ask, because it's baffling to me that many people who consider themselves conservatives are opposed to any assistance to Ukraine, and actually believe and parrot the propaganda of Russia as published through TASS and Sputnik. You can always see TASS and Sputnik come up with something at 4 a.m. and by 10 a.m. everybody's discussing it in the U.S. And when I see that propaganda in the mouth of people who I believe are sincere conservatives, but obviously very wrong on this, it worries me.
Well, it does me. I understand that some of them, as you say, are very sincere, and they are actually talking about some very important issues about, where our priorities are, what is the bottom line for America's national security. But I would just suggest that the security construct of the world is intrinsically connected. And if we stand by and allow a thug like Putin to rape and destroy Ukraine and gain that critically important strategic ground there, strategic territory.
For him, it's vital.
It's vital for him, and it is very dangerous. I think it's unfortunate that sometime long ago that we didn't just overnight declare that Ukraine was a member of NATO, because that might have been the deterrent necessary. Now it's going to take a lot of courage going forward, and we'll probably negotiate that away. I said to the Gold Institute that it was my opinion that eventually the Ukrainians would stand up so strongly that they would stop Russia from being able to completely overtake them.
Yes.
But that there might be some losses in the Donbass region, some of the
there will be.
Yeah.
And while Russia, I believe, on the one hand, I believe they already lost the war, in the sense that they cannot win it. The grand objectives that Putin described in the launching of the war are unattainable for them. But that doesn't mean they cannot do a lot of harm.
They can do a lot of harm, and if this should ever degrade into some sort of nuclear conflict, that would change the equation in a profound way. So we have to be very careful. I guess that's my point, Saul. If we
Yes,
remain strong and resolute, those that are the causes of freedom, we have the best chance of preventing war. I've always believed that with all my heart. I know it's not a
absolutely.
new concept, but we need to make sure that countries like Russia know that America will prevail in any circumstance. There is no point in fighting
Yes.
us, that we have no design on trying to bully anyone, that we're not after Russian territory, that we're not out to destroy Russia, but we will not stand by and let Russia threaten the free world.
Yeah.
And we
And,
will,
and, and frankly, we have the obligation to do so under the Budapest Memorandum. When people
absolutely,
ask me, what are we doing that? We are honoring our treaties.
we are honoring our word. And if we don't do that, then we lose the support of other people in the world and we
And,
threaten our
and
own
then we
national
lose the
security.
capacity to convince anybody of anything, anytime, ever again.
And that endangers our own national security.
Yes.
Yeah. So if we
Is,
were
is,
only,
is it
if
so
we were,
difficult to understand?
it's not difficult, but it's unfortunately, that there's a lot of the left has a way of conflating everything in the media these days. It
Yes.
just makes it very difficult, and that's why, as you mentioned earlier, one of the hopes is that somehow the American people, for their own good, for their sake of their own children, will inform themselves as to the truth, not as to any political ideology, but the truth, and let that animate their commitments politically.
No. We have about 5 minutes to go. I could go on for 3 hours listening to you,
Oh,
so
you're wonderful. Yeah.
that's a different thing. Uh, but to end, if you will, on a point of optimism, there are many more things I want to discuss with you regarding the war with Ukraine and how things are changing geopolitically faster than most people understand, and how important it is indeed for U.S. national security. But to end this with an optimist point, and hopefully have you again next month or so to discuss more issues that I'm sure events will accelerate. People ask me in Europe, in particular, in South America too, but in Spain, in Italy, seeing that we have such an advance of fascist institutions in the U.S., and by that I mean regulatory entities, corporations of state industry and labor. There's nothing more Mussolinian than the National Labor Board, for
I
instance.
couldn't agree more. I could not agree more.
And we have many of those that are quite scary, really.
Yeah.
And they asked me if we are not already a fascist country. And I said, no, we're not. But why not? Well, because better than half of the American population isn't.
Right.
What I see when I see America is outside of certain coastal cities, fiercely individualistic, freedom loving people who don't want a handout from the state, who don't want to belong to some kind of guile that will protect them from cradle to grave, who want to be left alone, who want to till their fields, start their business in a garage, and keep as much of what they make as possible, while worshipping in the church of their choice or none at all,
Right.
and not have the government put the camel nose under their tents.
Right.
Is that what you see from Arizona?
So I want you to know you inspire me, because that is the hope, brother. That is the hope that we somehow as a people begin to hold on to our deepest convictions and not let our children somehow step into the dark. Ronald Reagan said this. He said, "You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We can preserve this, the last best hope of mankind on earth for our children. Or we can sentence them to take that very last step into 1,000 years of darkness. If we do fail, at least let our children and our children's children say of us that we justified our brief moment here. We did all that could be done." And I pray that we hold on to that, because this country has really taken some bad turns in the last couple of elections, and it scares me to death. But I'm reminded that perhaps the greatest danger for the dissolution of America is right after we declared independence. It looked like we could be crushed almost before we started. The fire didn't really get the chance to burn before it could have been put out. And Jefferson, who I think said that, people that listen only to the newspapers and the media are more ignorant than those people who can't read at all, or something along those lines.
Yes.
But
he said something like that. He said that you can never trust anything published. For those who think that the media is a recent problem, Jefferson said you can never trust anything that's been published.
Yeah. Well, it's something that we just need to all pay attention to. And Jefferson was very concerned after the Declaration was signed. He was terribly, rightfully, justifiably concerned. And I think it was John Page that said to him, to encourage him in this great act of defiance and yet great act of patriotic commitment to freedom. He said, "Mr. Jefferson, it's going to be all right." To paraphrase it, he said, "Do you not think that there's still an angel that rides in the whirlwind and directs this storm?" And I believe that to be true, that even when we go through dark times with a Barack Obama or a Joe Biden as president, even when we see the BLM moving us towards just an outright communist nonsense and insanity, I am convinced that there is still an angel that rides in the whirlwind and directs this storm. And I'm convinced that there's still great hope for America. And as long as true freedom lives in the heart of just one American patriot, it's not time to raise the white flag just yet.
Not quite. We're not friends. So, I don't think I have a white flag.
Praise the Lord. That's the way to look at it.
And on that happy note, Trent, thank you so much. This hour flew by, and hopefully we can meet again in this medium. If not, I know we will in that Gold Institute that we love so much. None of us gets a salary, and we're still working for that. That's an important thing, because there are too many think tanks where people get considerable salaries, and sometimes you wonder if it is their conscience speaking or their bank account. I don't want to talk of anybody in particular, because there are good people everywhere.
Sure.
But there are some that worry me significantly. And one thing I can say about the Gold Institute is that all of us who work on issues around the world, as you said, do so at our own expense.
Right.
Because we want to do good. We want to do good by the country. We want ideas to come out and find their destination. And we're not doing it because we have to pay a mortgage at the end. We all have to pay a mortgage, but we have to do other work for that.
Right.
And yeah, I'll let you.
Well, I will just say, when I left Congress, since I left Congress, I've been invited on 36 boards or groups. And that's probably not untenable, but I have. And one of the reasons I joined the Gold Institute is because I so deeply believed in their acumen, in their philosophy, in their commitment, and that they were trying to actually be on the front line to create real solutions, not just study the problem. And so
Not just study the problem.
I encourage everybody to support the Gold Institute, because they are truly worth supporting. And
Like
I'm glad to be part
Ellie
of it.
told me at the very beginning, everybody knows what the problem is.
Yeah.
But there's nobody working on the solution.
Right. He's exactly right.
And that's what we need to do, I believe, and hopefully we'll assist in that direction.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much, and to everybody else out there, please don't forget, if you can and find it in your heart, to make a tax-deductible contribution to the Institute, to the link provided below, and or click that support button in YouTube or Odyssey, wherever you're watching this, and contribute to the channel you're watching so that we can continue to produce informative hours like this one.
Here, here.
And yes.
It's just been a wonderful privilege to be with you, Saul. I don't remember being interviewed by someone with just more basic acumen and just good common sense and just a heart that is committed to your fellow human beings.
You mean I'm better than Tucker Carlson?
Tucker Carlson is a friend, and he's about as smart as they get. But I tell you what, he's not any nicer than you are, and I hope you're listening, Tucker. I say God bless you, my brother.
And for everybody watching, next week, I'll see you on these channels with Enfat Kumbar. We're going to be discussing Iraq and Iran and what's going on in the Middle East today. And I think Enfat Kumbar, and I'm sure you know him as well, he is a senior fellow in the Institute, will give us a most interesting discussion in that hour. So Wednesday next, Enfat Kumbar, right here, and hopefully another day we'll have the enormous pleasure of having you back. And good night, everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you.